Last Saturday in Pennsburg, Pennsylvania, a young couple named Amanda and Nick Stewart had their big day. They got married in front of family and friends, and they had their wedding reception. They were getting ready to go to the airport to board a plane to Hawaii to celebrate their honeymoon. You can just imagine how excited they've got to be. You know, they've got all of these presents and they just spent this wonderful day getting married, and they're on their way, they thought, to Hawaii. They had made arrangements for Nick's dad to watch their dog, an 11-month-old female pit bull named Bailey. But before they could head out to Hawaii, they received a call. Bailey had somehow managed to get out of the house. Bailey was missing. So what do you do if you're in their situation? You've paid for your honeymoon and everything is set to go, but your beloved pet is gone. Do you trust Nick's dad and your friends to head up the search party and just go on to Hawaii and trust that that situation will be resolved? Well, Amanda and Nick decided that they were going to go the other way. They canceled their honeymoon trip. They put up a bunch of posters all over their neighborhood, and began this massive effort to find their dog Bailey. They searched last Saturday, last Sunday, they searched Monday, and they searched Tuesday. And you can imagine that after all of that looking around, they started to feel like they were going to have to give up. But on Wednesday morning, their beloved Bailey all of a sudden turned up. The happy couple was reunited with their dog. And from what I understand, they haven't even rescheduled their honeymoon yet. I think they're just having trouble trusting somebody to take care of their dogs. So why would they make a choice like that? Why would they skip their honeymoon just to go and retrieve the dog? Amanda said of Bailey, she said she's the sweetest, nicest dog, and she loves us and our other dogs, and she's just become part of our entire family. What do Amanda and Nick's actions say about the way that they value their dog? Well, obviously they value their dog very highly, as they should. And yet most people agree that human life is even more valuable than the life of an animal, even though our behavior doesn't always seem to reflect our value. I want to challenge you this morning to think about the value of human life. What is a person worth? What makes a person worthy? Do we have value just because we exist, or do we create our value by working hard and playing by the rules? I fear that we've gone down this stretch where we view the value of human beings more and more in terms of what service they can provide to society, or what monetary value their presence brings to a situation. It's important for us to have some sense of the value of another person, in part because it is hard to love your neighbor as yourself if you underestimate or undervalue them. We are very prone to the very erroneous suggestion that one group of people on this planet is of less value than another group of people. People always have been prone to that suggestion. Some of you have probably had experience with somebody that you knew, maybe somebody at work who did something really terrible. Not only did you question their judgment, how could you do something so awful, but you also questioned their value to the world in general. Like, wouldn't it be better off if we didn't have people in this world who would do something like that? We make these value judgments about people all the time. Because we're human beings, we tend to think that what we do, well, it isn't all that bad. But whereas what other people, especially other people in other countries do, that's a lot worse than what we do. And believe me, people all over the world think that way. So who decides what the value of another person is, another group of people? On what basis do they decide? Well, the scripture that Sue read this morning talks about the value of human beings in terms of all of God's creation. because God created the universe. And the next rung down is the angels, according to verse 5. Now, I know that some translations of the Bible say, you have made them, human beings, a little lower than God. Now, there's been some disagreement about what that means in past years, but I think most experts have now agreed that the word God in that verse 5, who made them a little lower than God, it's plural in Hebrew. And because the Bible teaches that there is only one God, not a bunch of gods, the best translation for that world is the angels. So you have made them a little lower than the angels. But that's one of the most amazing parts of this passage. It says that human beings have been made a little bit lower than the angels. Even though we are not as great as angels, the passage says God has given us power and authority over all of the earth. Now again, we may not use that power and authority in good ways, but God has still given us the kind of power we have over creation. God's choice to give us that power shows just how highly God values us as human beings. We literally have the power to blow up the planet and kill every living being if we decided to do so. It's hard for people to imagine that kind of power, no matter how many doomsday movies you might have watched. So it's a fair question. Why don't we blow up the world? Why didn't we get into an atomic war with the Russians during the Cold War? Why didn't we do that? Well, it's because we value human life as they do. Sure, we value plants and animals too, but when you get down to it, if plants and animals can't live, then we can't live. That's why it's important for us as people of faith to think about the value of other people as well as our own value. We need to talk with the people around us about the value of human life, because I think we're beginning to get away from the idea that each person has a God-given inherent worth. Our idea of a person's worth is so tied up in our culturally defined ideas of beauty and youth and wealth and power and success. The downside of defining things that way is that most people find it very difficult to fit into those categories. If you don't fit into one of those categories, then you aren't worth as much. You don't have as much value as people who do fit into those categories. I want you to notice that this passage in Psalm 8 makes no such distinction. It doesn't say that God has made the good people or the pretty people or the rich people or the successful people a little lower than the angels. It says that God made all of humanity at the level, almost at the level of the angels, and gave us more power and authority than God gave to them. God doesn't think that one group of people have more value than another group does, even if Israel is the chosen people of the Old Testament. This passage reminds us that God has given us authority over creation, over the livestock, the world of animals, the plants, and the insects, the marine world. God has done so because God has made us so great and intelligent and capable. So why do we find it so easy to start dividing people up in the world, deciding that one group in the world is more worth than another group? And why is it that so many of us have this tendency to undervalue ourselves, to sell ourselves short, and to give in to the idea that other people are simply more valuable to the world than we are? In John Grisham's novel, The Rainmaker, he discusses the way that juries decide the monetary value of a wrongful death suit. As a trial attorney himself, who has tried such cases, Grisham knows that not every life is of equal value to society. He says that the group in society whose families are most likely to be awarded the highest amount of damages for wrongful death are usually young married men, usually not men of color. The families of married women tend to receive lower damages, and the family of single people and people of color are usually awarded still less damages in a wrongful death lawsuit. Juries also award damages based on their perception of whether or not they think somebody was a contributor to society. Believe me when I say that such perceptions are very subjective. They depend on opinion, and they vary widely among the different cultural groups of our society. The families of people who are homeless or unemployed or poor consistently receive significantly less in damages. Now, you can come to your own conclusion about whether or not these kinds of awards are justified. But his observations show that we tend to make judgments about people's value based on our own perceptions of them. How would our view of the world change if we looked at everybody as God's greatest crowning glory in creation, as people who were born with and continue to retain God's own glory, God's own approval, just because they are human beings, regardless of the choices that they make in life? Is it possible to look at every person you meet, everyone you know, everyone you hear about, and see them as a reflection of God's own glory? Even the folks in prison, even the folks who are high school dropouts, even the folks who are addicted to drugs, even the teen mothers, even the kids in Peoria who are involved in gangs, even folks who get arrested for a DUI, even the people who buy their food here in town with food stamps. Psalm 8 says, "You have made them a little lower than the angels and have crowned them with glory and honor." Really? Those people? Aren't those people drains on society? Wouldn't our society be better off without them? Haven't we spent enough money trying to accommodate these people? Haven't they cost us enough of the taxpayers' dollars? I guess you could look at it that way, especially if you don't believe in the concept of redemption. But again, I think we're conflating the value of a human being with what we see to be their usefulness to society. Those are two very different things. I think we have the right to think about people's behaviors and their contributions to society. I think we have the right to talk about fairness and justice. I think we should communicate with the world about the fact that that humanity is fallen without God, and it is in need of redemption. I think our faith and our reading of the Bible show us how to understand what God teaches us about those issues. But the value of a human being is a different matter. In the book of Romans chapter 5, Paul tells us that God demonstrated the value of a human being just in case there was any question. Paul says God demonstrated his love for us that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Regardless of how good or bad anyone is or was, Christ died for us. Can you see the difference between a person's value and what he or she does in life? Our value comes from our Creator, not from us, not from other people, not from some culturally defined set of standards or rules, as fair and as good as we might think those rules are. We cannot begin to love our neighbor as ourselves if we don't understand that. We can't really be Jesus' followers that way. We should, if we can't get outside of our own value systems and just value people as people. Let me give you a simpler illustration to show you what I mean. Author and psychologist Edmund Bourne published a widely read book on anxiety. It's on the shelves of booksellers all over the world. In his chapter on personality styles, he really challenges the tendency we have to base our value, the value of others, on our accomplishments, something that I do all too often personally. He insists that a person's worth is a given. It's not something earned. He points out an inconsistency that a lot of us have. This goes back to that first illustration. He notes that we believe our pets have inherent worth. We love our pets just because they are. Even if they don't do silly tricks or snuggle up with us, even if they make a mess on the floor or chew something up, even if at some point they aren't quite as cute as they used to be, we still love them for their inherent value as our pets. If God has created us just a little lower than the angels, shouldn't we consider how much more value we all have just because we are, just because we exist? How is it that we have an easier time seeing the value of our pets than we have seeing the inherent value of ourselves or of other people sometimes? One person who really wrestled with this question was a Major League pitcher named Dave Dravecky. Dravecky was an all-star pitcher for the San Francisco Giants back in 1988, and he had a terrific year for that team. That fall, his success was overshadowed by a diagnosis of cancer in his pitching arm. He had to have a portion of his deltoid muscle removed from his arm to remove the cancer. He worked really hard during the off-season. He exercised and he pitched, and he was able to rehab his arm. His doctors told him it would be a miracle if he ever pitched again. But he did. He remembers pitching a 4-3 win over the Dodgers the next spring. Dravecky was ecstatic. It was not like he just cheated death, but he defied all the odds to be able to get back to the major leagues. 5 days later, he made his next start. And he threw what he called the pitch heard around the world. It was baseball's version of the Joe Theismann knee injury. As he was throwing the pitch, his arm just snapped in two. He fell to the ground, not knowing what had happened to him. Cancer had come back in his arm so severely that his arm snapped in two as he was pitching. The cancer was so invasive that they had to take his arm, his shoulder blade, and the left side of his collarbone, amputate them, for fear that the cancer would spread and take his life. His dream, what he had worked so hard for all of his life, it was all over in one pitch. During his recovery time, he had an opportunity to think about the value of human beings. Was he less valuable now because he couldn't pitch? He really began to question that idea, which was really ingrained in his mind. While he was navigating what for him was the uncharted water of loss, pain, and hope, he also explored how we define our true worth. He says that the truth he learned, especially from the perspective of the Christian faith, is that it's not what you do that matters most. It is who you are. And he writes this. He says, the experiences of my life have drawn me to discover and share about the value and significance of relationships. Relationships with coworkers, family members, and anybody else on my team, he says. Psalm 8 is really telling us that everybody is on our team. There is no us and them. There is just us because there is only one God. Those kinds of divisions are false, and they usually only serve as a pretense to produce the value of another human being. Your value, my value, it is rooted in God's greatness. As the New Testament tells us, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Even when we do what we know we shouldn't do. Even when we fail to live up to our own standards and disappoint ourselves or other people, God doesn't value us any less. We're just a little lower than the angels in God's eyes. And so are our neighbors. May we always learn to value ourselves and others using God's valuation